Would I want this written on my tombstone? If not, then why was I living this way? When I was sitting in that counseling session early on, completely broken, facing the most difficult, crazy decisions of my life, my counselor asked me a question. What do you want on your tombstone? I wasn't making the tough decisions that I needed to make. And I was putting off all the decisions that I needed to make until I absolutely had to. And so I was allowing other people's decisions to be forced upon me rather than taking them on myself. How did I end up in this situation? How did I end up in court-mandated counseling? That was one of the questions that I asked myself a lot. How did I end up here? Well, let me just recap. So this is a couple of months after the incidents described in The Worst Day of My Life, where I had lost my kids, and I had my wife had gotten arrested. My kids were living with my sister, and with my mom had been taken into CPS. And I was facing this impossible prospect of how I was going to put all the pieces of this back together. And since I was in the house, and since I was married to my wife at the time, I was also under investigation. So part of my requirements for getting anything moving forward with my CBS case was that I had to go through a psychological evaluation, and then as a result of that, I had to undergo court-mandated counseling. Now, growing up, counseling was very much poo-pooed in the circles that I was in. People read the Bible. People prayed. People talked to their friends maybe about the issues that they were going on. But it was very much communicated that if you needed to go to a counselor, that you were weak, that there was something wrong, right? And that they didn't have the answer. You should be able to find the answers through the Bible and things like that. Now, I agree that the Bible does carry the answer for most questions, but every once in a while it is helpful to talk to some people outside of that. So here I was in this Dr. Smitham's office, downtown Spokane, Washington, and did the psychological evaluation. He wrote out this whole big long thing that he submitted to the court, and he gave me a copy. I wish I had that. It'd be interesting to go back and look at it, but it was literally like 8 years ago. So I doubt I could find it. But I would go to his office every week, and I would just sit there and I would just like unload on these things. I would talk about all these decisions that I had to make. Was I going to try to keep my family together? Was I going to divorce my wife and try to get my kids back? Was I going to try to rebuild the whole thing? What was I going to do? I was faced, they felt like decisions that nobody could make. I had never even come anywhere close to having to make decisions like that. And so, like I said, I would put them off, and pretty soon I would get decisions would be forced down upon me, and I was agonizing over it. My wife had her own counseling, and for somebody she was talking to, a whole different process, because she was very much directly involved with the whole thing, and I was yes, I was directly involved, but you get the idea. On top of this decision that I was trying to make of whether or not I was going to keep my whole family together or just try to get my kids back and leave my wife, on top of that, making it all that much more difficult, is that I found out that she had had an affair. Shortly after all of this had started, she had started cheating on me. Now, for most people, that's for a lot of people, that's just a quick, absolutely no. And nowadays, I probably would say the same thing, but at the time, I was still under this illusion that I was trying to get my whole family back together. And I thought the best way to do that, the optimum situation, was for me to try to work things out with my wife, and then for us to try to get our kids back together. Now, my kids lived up north, about 2 hours away from Spokane with my mom. They went back and forth between my mom's house and my sister's house. And so for the first month or so, I was going up there to visit my kids on the weekends. And then after a while, it got shifted to where we did supervised visits, where I would meet the kids with a supervisor, and we'd meet in this little 10 by 12 room in the basement of a bank. Not ideal, not great for 3 little kids, but I loved to go see them, and they loved coming to see me, and we made the best of it. So here I am in the middle of all of this, and that's when I found out my wife was cheating. And now I'm faced with yet another difficult decision. And so one day I went into my counseling session. I explained all this difficulty that I was having and how I was having a hard time reckoning all these things. And he said, I want you to do an exercise. I want you to think about what you want written on your tombstone. I was like, what? And he's like, so you know how when people die, they put something on their tombstone that says, good husband, good father, loyal soldier, whatever it is, right? So think about what those words might be that you would want on your tombstone. So we talked about it a little bit, and I can't remember what I came up with. It was something like, I wanted to be a man of integrity, a man of loyalty, a good father, a good husband, all of these things. And then he said, next time you're facing one of these decisions that feels like it's impossible, think about the man that is described on your tombstone. Think about that honorable, loyal man of integrity who's faithful to his family and to his children. What would that man make? What decision that you could make right now would reinforce the terms that you want on your eventual tombstone? Let that be your guide to help you make your decisions. And I spent about a week just mulling through all of that. And I'm not saying every decision was easy after that, but I at least had a framework where I could be like, oh, okay, if this is what I want to be, then this is the decision I need to make. This is what I need to do. I need to make my actions and my choices and my decisions and my thoughts line up with what I want people to think of me eventually down the road in the world. Proverbs 22:1 says, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor better than silver or gold. Now, I'm not out for silver and gold, but there's very little in this world that is more valuable to a man and to really any person than their name, the thing that people remember them by. I had spent years reacting to life rather than living life with purpose. And that had created, like at that point in my life, there would have been a completely different thing written on my tombstone. It probably would have been like I've described in the past. It would have been fat, lazy, pervert. Those would have been the words on my tombstone up until that point. He was not a good father, not a good husband. He was a liar. All of these things would have been the things that would have been written on my tombstone. And not because intentionally, but that's just the way I lived. I was allowing myself to live out of that nature of myself, which is not who I really am and who I really wanted to be. Through all of that, I decided that if I wanted my children to remember me as a man of integrity, I had to start making decisions that aligned with that for their good, not just my good, and for their good, for their future, for their long-term gain and goal and benefit. And they may not even see it right now. They probably can't. They just want to be like, hey, they just want everything to be better. We want daddy, but we also want grandma and auntie, who later really did become their mom. And I talked about that a couple episodes ago. I wanted to be an example to my children of the type of man that I would want them to be, especially my boys, but my daughter too. I wanted to be the type of man that my boys would want to be. And I wanted to be the type of man to my daughter that she could look up to and trust and to take care of her. 2 Timothy 4:7 says, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Would I be able to describe myself that way? Is that a verse that would be able to be written on my tombstone when I died? At that point in my life, it wouldn't have been. But how could I live the rest of my life now in order that I would feel worthy to have something like that written on my tombstone? Or would I be able to look back and spend my days trying to figure out how I followed everyone but God, how I was selfish, how I tried to fulfill my own needs? So that was the first big lesson that Dr. Smitham taught me. There are actually two things that I carry with me to this day that I learned from that counseling. And I no longer poo-poo counseling. I now tell people on the regular, hey, go get some counseling. This is beyond me to be able to help you with. You need a professional. So I would also go in there at times and I would feel like I was having difficulty separating things out. Like, how do I make this decision for this group of people over here? And how do I set this person aside? How do I keep these things separate? How do I not let this invade this part of my life and this invade this part of my life? Because I was having all of these different people speak their opinions. I was having my mom and my sister, and I was having my ex-wife, and I was having, well, she was my wife at the time, but I was having her mom, and I was having this friend say this, and I was having my lawyer say this, and the social worker say this. How do I make sense of it all? And I'd go in there and I'd just be like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And it was all weighing on my shoulders. And I just, again, between trying to make all these hard decisions and trying to separate all these things out in my life, I was getting stuck all the time. So the next lesson that Dr. Smitham taught me, he said, Andrew, there's 3 types of business in this world. There's your business, there's other people's business, and then there's God's business. And I was like, what does that mean? Well, and so he's like, there are certain things that are your responsibility to take care of. Your actions, your choices, and your decisions are yours to take care of. And that takes up a good chunk of your life. That's the stuff that you can control. And then there's all these choices and decisions and actions that are other people's business. And they directly affect you every day. But I think that I can control them because they're people that are directly in my sphere of influence. But it doesn't really matter. If you've ever dealt with addicts, you know that you can say all the right things and do all the right things around them, but they're still going to make their own decisions. We're actually all in some ways like that. But it's particularly in the circumstances I was in, there was a whole lot of things that other people were doing that were affecting me, that I had no control over, but I just had to find peace with. I could only handle what was my business. So there was my business, there was other people's business, and then there was this other big category that's God's business. And that is stuff that I don't even have any kind of influence over at all, because God's business is God's business. I can pray, and I can ask God for things, and I can ask Him to help me. But there are certain things that only He can control. There are certain outcomes, certain things in the future that only He can determine the outcome. And yes, He uses people to accomplish these things. But there's no way that I can affect those. I can affect my business primarily, and I can have some influence on other people's business, but I still have to learn to let that go. And I still have to remember whose name is going to be on that tombstone. Only I can determine what's worthy to be put on that tombstone. Yeah, people can put whatever they want to on it. They can call me the biggest asshole in the world. But deep down, I would know. My business, other people's business, and then that big category of God's business. So I learned how to let these things go. And I started to really be able to actually process through these difficult things. And did I make all the right decisions? No. Was I operating selfishly sometimes? Yes. Was I operating from a place where I didn't know things? Yes. And I tried really hard. And over the years, I've gotten way better at this decision. That understanding that I can't control always what happens to me. I can't control what people say. I can't control what people think. I can't control what people do. But I can control how I respond to those things. And I can't control how the world acts around me. I definitely can't control how God reacts towards me. I can't control His actions towards me. All I can do is try to make the best decision that I can when I'm faced with those things. And I had a lot of that stuff going on. Overwhelming amounts at times. At first, all of this seems contradictory. We're supposed to help carry each other's burdens, right? So Galatians 6:2-5 says, "Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. For each will have to bear his own load." At first, this verse seems contradictory. Help carry each other's burdens, but also bear your own burden. But here's the key. Some things we're called to help carry out with other people, and some things we're meant to carry alone. When we're trying to push those things that we're supposed to carry onto other people, it increases their burden. And when we're not carrying our burden properly, We can't help other people bear their burdens. It's like the whole idea that when you're in an airplane's about to crash, what do they tell you to do when the oxygen drops? They say, put your own mask on. That's not because it's to be selfish. That's to ensure that you have your oxygen on so that you can then help other people. I had to stop taking responsibility for things that were not mine to carry at the time. I wasn't responsible for my wife's legal case. I wasn't responsible for what seemed like these long, dragged out legal decisions that just kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and causing more and more stress and strain in decision. I wasn't responsible for her having an affair. I wanted to blame myself because that was my nature, right? But that decision was 100% on her. Matthew 6:34 says, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself, and sufficient for the day is its own trouble. You could also apply that, like, do not be anxious about other people's business, for other people's business will be anxious for itself, and sufficient for today is your own trouble. I was exhausting myself trying to control all these outcomes. My job wasn't to fix the future or to fix other people's problems. My job was to just obey God. But learning to let go of all of this wasn't easy. I had to learn to let go. I wanted to make it all my business, but I had to learn to let go and let God take care of his business. I had to learn to let go of the things that weren't my business. I had to learn to let God handle the things that were his business, because there's no way that I could do that. It's impossible for me. Psalms 46:10 says, be still and know that I am God. This was the hardest part for me to accept, because it's no longer in my hands. If I let other people take care of their business and I let God take care of his business, that means all of that stuff that seems overwhelming is no longer under my control. And I can be a little bit of a control freak sometimes. You may not think it, but I'm letting you know I am. And I definitely didn't want that stuff out of my control. I wanted everybody to do what I wanted them to do, but I had to let go. I had to stop striving. I had to start trusting, first of all, mostly that God was going to do his business, because I know God's going to take care of his stuff. The hard part was trusting that other people were going to take care of theirs. And I knew my ex-wife wasn't going to take care of her business. But I still had to let that go, because it was beyond me. So God was using all of this with me running off to see my kids 2 hours away, and me trying to deal with my ex-wife and she was my wife at the time. Like, we were still married for another couple of years after all of this. He was using it to shape me into the man that I am now, the father that I am now, the friend that I am now. And hopefully at some point in the future, maybe I'll be a husband again. Maybe he'll give me that opportunity. I don't know. I'd love it to happen, but that's not necessarily in my control. That's God's business, and sort of another person's business too. So what's on your tombstone? What words do you want to see someday on your tombstone? Think about that. It doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just think about that. And next time you're facing a difficult decision, think about, what kind of legacy are you leaving? What words would people that you know write on your tombstone? What battles are you fighting that are yours? And what battles are you trying to fight that are not yours? That are someone else's business? That are God's business? Those things don't belong to you. And they are just going to weigh you down so that you don't have enough energy and strength to carry your own stuff. It's time to let them go. It's time to let them go. So if you're avoiding hard decisions, there's a couple pieces, there's a couple of frameworks that you can look at, how you can make these difficult decisions. Have you had to make the tough decisions about your own legacy at any point, recently or in the past? Do you see anything like that coming up in your future? If you have, drop legacy down in the comments before. Just comment legacy. I'll reach out to you. While you're at it, like the video, comment on the video, share the video with someone that you think might benefit from this content. Also, down in the description, there's a link to all my social media, including a free resource that could really help you out a lot. And if you sign up for that, you'll get put on an email list, and every single time a podcast drops or a blog post drops, you'll get notified. I'd appreciate it. Love you all. Talk to you later.
So if you like this content, please give it a rating, a review, and share it with your friends. Also, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me and what I'm all about and what I can maybe do for you, check out my website at thedangerousgentleman.org. That's thedangerousgentleman.org. Thank you for listening.